Good evening.
Good evening. We'd like to welcome you to the beginning of Treaty Week, Treaty Recognition Week in Ontario and across Canada. And we'd like to acknowledge that today we are actually recording from the traditional territory of Fort William First Nation and Epkiwaju, who are signatory to the Robinson Spirit Treaty of 1850.
Yes. So it's been a busy couple weeks, actually 3 weeks, going on our fourth week in part one. And this was the big module, module 3. And it certainly looks daunting when you get started, but it's a little bit kind of like a principal's day, I think, all over the place. And you might deal with every single one of those pieces in one day for sure. So we start off with legislation.
Yeah, I was just telling Christy that a lot of people, had commented that they use common sense, and with common sense got 3 out of 5 roughly, right? But there was a few stumpers in there. And a few people I was chatting with through WhatsApp, really they talked about how much there was to know. And for those of you that actually bought the Carswell book, it's about that thick and about 1,000+ pages. And that's just really gives you a sense of the enormous amount of legislation that surrounds running a school and being responsible for a school. Yeah. Now the good news in that is that some of those obscure things are just that, obscure, and so they may or may not ever cross paths with you. And that most of your board policies, if not all your board policies, are all derived from the legislative work. So if you follow your board policies, for the most part, you will certainly be able to make sure that you're doing everything as you should. So,
and it was, hopefully you had an opportunity to interact with Pam Agawa from down south there for the FNMI module, and one of the nice things about that module is that it precluded Treaty Week, so hopefully you've got some ideas and insights and maybe shared some resources with each other. I know Denise just posted on all of the announcement section some resources and ideas for Treaty Week if you're looking at that in your schools.
That's just a few.
Yeah.
I actually had posted a little podcast there that's about 21 minutes that I listened to today, and the woman who was in the podcast was a chief in the Treaty 3 area as well. So it was nice to get a perspective of really what the Treaty 3 in this case was and how she views it and talks about it in connection to the 7 grandfather teaching. So I thought you might just enjoy having a listen to that. I know a lot of you commute and talk about listening to things in your car, so you could download that and have a listen.
And then you also looked at special ed this last module, in module 3, and that's something I spent quite a bit of time actually as a special education teacher and what we call a facilitator, or many of you may call them CERT, special education resource teacher, at our board. And I put a broad comment on my courses on part 1 because I wanted to make a statement, well, I guess not make a statement, I wanted to talk a little bit about, especially for future leaders, you are, yes, responsible for the IEPs in the building, you are responsible for ensuring that the needs and the IEP are being met. You are responsible, of course, for the IPRCs and those identification pieces. But there's a key piece happening right now, and when I just transitioned to my new school a few years ago, this was a bit of a mindset shift for them, and that was the idea between particularly K to 3, that if we are actually exercising the universal design for learning principles that you find in Learning for All, that we are really working from that assessment-based stance for assessment for as of learning that's in growing success, then we really should be meeting the needs of all learners where they're at. And so what that means in K to 3, the dispersion of children and their development in both reading, literacy, and math is so wide that it is quite probable that you will have non-readers and readers and advanced readers in a grade 2 class. That does not mean that your non-readers are necessitating an IEP. So I wanted to really put a thought process in folks' head about when we need an IEP and what the purpose of the IEP is for. And so in my school, we rarely identify children or give IEPs for K to 3. Unless they need consistent accommodations, and those consistent accommodations have been in place for a while, and we feel like those need to be enshrined there.
They usually come in from preschool as well.
Yep, so, they do.
With case conference meetings.
Exactly. Or they've been identified, and we certainly have children that arrive that have been formally identified through an IPRC process, and that's another place. But I really emphasize with my staff that, particularly in K to 3, if we are really working through Growing Success document and the Learning for All and teaching from those spaces, then we should be meeting the needs of really all of our learners. Our concerns arise for me when kids aren't moving at all, and we've done everything we can do. We've accessed our toolbox, and everybody else around us has a toolbox, and children aren't moving forward, then we have more concerns and we start to look at other possibilities. But I just wanted to kind of put that out there for you, and you have the ability as the principal to impress upon those philosophies. So.
Absolutely. I'm thinking I taught 3-4 for quite a long time, and that split, I had people that didn't know what A sounded like phonemically, and I had kids reading, novels at a grade 8, grade 9 level. So I had the whole range.
Yeah, that's quite common.
But they move. The key thing is keep kids moving.
Keep moving.
Yeah. So those are the conversations with teachers when they would say, well, my students are stuck. So then we start looking at it like a diagnosis like a doctor might start checking out different things and seeing how they learn best. Anyone who has had children in high school taking math, certainly I think you've probably had that experience of them perhaps learning better in certain ways of instruction than others. We had I like this legal issues because that website's great for looking at different cases and where things are going, and it kind of gives you a heads up into the direction that legally the principal responsibilities will be going in the province with the case law as it moves forward. And that's a nice little site. One of the things I would encourage you to do if you are working in a school board that has like CPCO or OPC, one of the principal support groups, is utilize the legal services for the school administrators. Most of the principal they're not federations, but associations. Have a legal team. So if something happens and you're not entirely sure, call just to make sure that you're protected in this process. Because at the end of the day, anything that happens in your school, you are the one to be responsible for that. And we worked with a board lawyer, and for a while I felt like I saw him all the time. And then I didn't see him again for a long time until I saw him again, and I'm like, hey, he said hi. I said, things have been good, I haven't had to see you. But certainly, under the school board that we're in, you only see that person when it's come to a certain point that we need to now have a lawyer involved in it.
And for OPS, it's called PRS, if you're calling them, and I'm not entirely certain the CPCO branch of that, but they can give you lots of advice on process, and I can give you just a small example. I had an incident at my school, and even though I had spoke with my superintendent really wasn't unsure of the process we wanted to take, and it was OPS PRS that advised us. OPC, did I say OPS? Sorry, OPC PRS, that advised us of our next steps and really helped us make sure that the pathway we were taking was solid and legally sound. So they've seen it all, everything under the sun, and they've got great advice. So
so just a way to have a look at that. And this particular section had 2 case studies, so we had 3.3 and 3.9. They were similar but different. And the main reason that we ask you to use that ABCDE framework is to ensure that you do have a clean process, because in the moment several things are going through your brain, including heart palpitations perhaps, because your self-talk is happening as you're trying to get to a situation and figure out how you're going to navigate it. So training yourself to think about things and consider options and consider possibilities, and then discard certain things and talk yourself into a good space, because all kinds of things go through your head, or at least mine, in the moment. So this is just a nice way to make that thinking very clear and transparent and help you come to a solid process. And I mean, every single one that I've read has had a solid process. They all haven't had the same, but still the process has been nice and clean on all of them, and cited some of the acts and regs and case law and policies and procedures around that really guide that decision making. So good job with all of that.
Yeah, and then moving on into Module 4, we asked you to revisit Simon Sinek, and this was it's a calculated move. We'd like, after you've experienced some of the modules and some of the learning and the dialogue with each other, to go back to that video and think again about what he has to say about good leaders make people feel safe. And hopefully you've picked up some ideas about what that means in the broader sense and sort of the systemic sense in your school, in the school culture sense, and then what kinds of actions you as a leader might be taking to do those things. So we always enjoy that conversation in the revisit.
And there's a bit of a flow from there into the connected leader, and then David Transler talking about health and well-being.
Yeah.
So really, we're into almost the mindfulness chapter of team building, perhaps.
Yeah.
And helping people find that space. We did strengths-based work, and we had this thing called the Obermann sphere. When the sphere is open, there's all this happy space for thoughts to flow through and security. But when people get stressed, that sphere closes right off, and nothing gets in or out. And that's a dangerous place for an administrator to be. And certainly you've probably worked with students or staff who've closed off and shut down. And you have to, I always called it coming at it from the side. When I would see people having major stressful moments, I just sort of sidle up beside them and start talking this way as opposed to face on.
Yeah.
Because it tends to be a little more comforting and less threatening. And I read somewhere that most major conversation between parents and their kids happen in the car. When the kids are in the back seat and the parents are in the front, so that you're not, face to face necessarily. So same rules apply. I think it's human nature, the psychology of how we think and feel.
Yeah.
So on that note, we are going to wish you a great week, and hopefully you have a few opportunities to talk about treaties with your kids, figure out what traditional territory that you happen to be on if you're somewhere in Canada. And
as some of the folks in my school are doing, they're looking through the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations and thinking about what they as children and they as class members can commit to, one thing. So
Yes.
there's some really neat happenings out there. So please enjoy it and
have a great week.